coming in as we speak. Let me try and add him back. Oh, you in?
Hey,
Hey, how you doing? I've got a black
yeah, good.
screen. You're
Say again?
hiding. I've got a black screen. You're hiding.
Oh, hang on. Uh, how do you turn the video on?
Um,
Hang on. I'll get someone who knows more about this than me, which
I
is
was about to
practically
say,
anything.
it just usually automatically comes on. But
Which
welcome
is-
to all the guests that are tuned in. We've got Mr. Andy Clarke here. A very Ooh, I've got something. Something's coming up. Just got to turn it around now to front
What's it?
facing. I can see lots of Amazon boxes. You're as bad as me.
Okay, no. Okay, yeah.
I usually hide them. Good afternoon and welcome. Thank you so much for joining.
That's all right.
Just wait till you get into a comfortable position. Thank you to everyone that's joined in, that's listening in. We've got a few things that we'd like to discuss, but it is about the EUBANK BENN card that, well, we should have had that last night.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's been quite a week, hasn't it, to say the least. But yeah, that wasn't lost on me. I was in Doncaster last night at Doncaster Racecourse, and
Yeah.
Steve Wood put on a good card there. It was really good fun. But obviously, the main discussion point between myself and colleagues before we started was the events of this week, and I don't think I've ever really seen, or I mean, we're all involved in it to an extent, been involved in
Yeah.
anything quite like it.
Well, yeah, well, it's a shock for me. Obviously, I'm new to obviously being involved in the media side, but I'm somebody that's followed boxing for some time. Obviously, you've got 25 years plus of reporting, commentating, being intrinsically involved in the sport. But there seems to be like a bit of a timeline of events that have happened leading up to obviously the postponement, the cancellation of the fight, because it started all well and good. We've got the fight being announced on August the 9th. The media presser was August the 12th. I remember speaking to Chris Eubank Jr. and asking him, is Roy Jones Jr. going to be in your corner? And, why isn't your dad here? Is he going to be involved, etc.? And Junior was saying, his dad didn't want the fight to happen yet because he believed it's a fight that could have happened in the future and probably built a better momentum. So that was kind of like put to bed there. By August the 13th, the card is sold out. It's plastered all over Matchroom. But then we start to get some rumbles in the background from Senior about him not being happy that the fight's going ahead. And then I think September the 12th, he's vowed, I think Mail Online was where it all started to come out from. Mail Online put a report out saying that he's vowed to scupper his son's historic fight with Conor Benn over the 157-pound catchweight, insisting his life cannot be put in danger. I've already lost one son. I don't want to lose another. So then we sort of like have that, I don't know, that sort of like pattern of, I don't know, maybe deteriorating. Your thoughts on that, Andy?
Well, that when you go through kind of things like that, things present differently in light of what we now know. And I find it the timeline of events that I've managed to glean, and all you can go on in these situations is information as presented to you by the individuals involved, and some entities haven't been all that forthcoming, and most of the information has come from Eddie Hearn. And as I understand it, the test was conducted what was it, towards the end of August. I think that was what's been discussed, and that the findings were submitted to the organisers by VADA on September the 23rd, and obviously the comments from Senior came before that. The 23rd is the date that we were given by Eddie Hearn, and the difficulty in situations like this is that there is very little clarification of anything. There is very little transparency. People don't seem to really want to say too much at all. And to my mind, the big problem with all of this basically is that last week the discussion moved on very, very quickly from breaking news of an adverse finding. I remember around the Dillian White situation, we were all very careful not to say positive test or failed test. It was always adverse finding. It doesn't seem to have been quite so strict in this case, because for whatever reason, I don't quite know why. But as soon as that happened, they should have pulled the fight at that point. It should never have come to this discussion of can the fight go ahead or not. The best way to deal with this, and I think if they had their time over again, certainly in light of what has happened, I would like to think that they would deal with it differently. As soon as they got that finding back from VADA, they should have pulled the fight. They should have said that this is what has happened. Okay, the UCAD tests have come back clear, but we signed up to VADA. We're committed to clean sport. We signed up to them for a reason. And of course, we have to take their findings with the utmost seriousness, or what is the point of signing up to it in the first place? The fight cannot go ahead on October the 8th. We will do whatever we need to do now to get to the bottom of this situation. And then the individual involved, which here is Conor Benn, would say whatever they wanted to say, which you would always imagine would be to issue a strenuous
apology.
Yeah, a strenuous denial or a public apology, depending on what the situation is, depending on whether you haven't done this knowingly or whether you have. And that's really what should have happened. But they found themselves at this fork in the road, a fork which never should exist, but as we know does, due to this kind of disconnect, this seeming disconnect between the lack of authority of VADA, if you like, and the fact that we're under UCAD rules. But they chose the wrong route, and that point of no return came really quickly. It came really early in this whole situation. And once they'd gone past it, there really was no going back. And Eddie Hearn has said that the Board of Control did know about the VADA findings, that they knew early on. They haven't said anything about that.
No.
But it came to light anyway because the story was leaked. I mean, that's clearly what happened. And then you have to wonder by who? Because it's not going to be the promoters, because they were keen to try and force the fight through. It's not going to be Team Ben, you wouldn't imagine. And so that leaves you really with the most likely candidates, and whoever did it, in my mind, is to be congratulated. The most likely candidates are VADA, the Boxing Board of Control, if they knew, or Team EUBANK. And that's where we ended up with this situation that we had in Fight Week, where, as I say, all of a sudden things just escalated really quickly from news of a positive test, which is massive, massive news, to all of a sudden we're talking about should the fight go ahead or not. Of course it shouldn't. But that was what was really extraordinary about this for me, because it just should never have got there. It should never have been about that.
May I ask then, in your experience, and this is, forgive my ignorance, because I don't understand how the different drug testing rules work. Now, if you're UCAD are the one that are backed by the British Boxing Board of Control, that's their guide, that's their go-to source for their testing. However, you can sign up for the Voluntary Anti-Doping Association, which is not necessarily recognised by the British Boxing Board of Control. Now, if the British Boxing Board of Control, which has said we do believe that this fight should be prohibited, that means don't pass go, in the interests of boxing. So shouldn't there be some kind of reform with the testing, so that they can work together? Because I can see where there's a bit of a grey area to say, well, and this is me playing devil's advocate and being ignorant, the British Boxing Board of Control use UCAD, they don't necessarily use VADA. So is that why they try to push it through? Because they usually go via UCAD? Forgive me, educate me, I'm ignorant on this.
Yeah, it's a complex situation, and I'm not entirely sure that anybody really knows the exact answer to this. And this is what would appear to be the kind of loophole that needs to be, potential loophole that needs to be closed. So what they were saying basically in their
Absolutely.
statement, what they were saying in their statement, Matchroom and Wasserman, was adverse finding with VADA, but clear with UCAD. The British Boxing Board of Control subscribe to UCAD, which is the same as WADA. They're the ones who operate in conjunction with sport in this country. Therefore, there has been no charge, so there can be no suspension. So he's able to box. That's what they were saying. That's what they were trying to push through. But you mentioned the word prohibit there, and I found that a very interesting word when they used that in the statement of Board of
Precisely.
Control. Because language is really important in these things, because there are legalities involved. And if you look up prohibit in the dictionary, what it says is to forbid by law,
Correct.
rule, or other authority. And Matchroom would dispute their right to forbid it by law, hence the talk of the High Court, but by rule or other authority. Well, their other authority is as custodians of boxing in this country, is of looking out for the best interests of boxing, which obviously first and foremost includes the fighters, the image of the sport, everything. That is literally what they are here for. And under that authority, they prohibited the fight. Now, surely, logically, it would follow through that under that same authority, they could choose, could they not, to accept a VADA finding as being equivalent to a UCAD finding, because the VADA testing is held in very high esteem. It is seen as the gold standard when it comes to drug testing. Surely they can decide by their authority to make that interpretation, because this substance that was detected is on both banned lists. It's not the case that it's on VADA's, but it's not on WADA's and therefore not on UCAD's. So when you use that word prohibit, basically you are giving yourself that, or you are ascribing to yourself that right to exercise that authority, essentially. So you can translate it to that other situation, I would have thought. Now, this is where you get into the kind of the legal territory of it. And it was interesting to me to hear them say on Thursday, wasn't it? It all seemed to last such a long time, but it was just on Thursday that they had decided not to go down the route of the High Court. I'm not a legal expert, but I would struggle to believe that they would have got very far with the High Court. Now, I don't know that for a fact, but you look at the what has actually happened here, which is that your athlete has taken a test that you wanted them to take for the purposes of ensuring that this is a fair contest. And then when they have come up short with that said test, you now want to bypass it. That wouldn't appear to me to be a very strong argument. And there have been plenty of inconsistencies in what they've said as well. Eddie Hearn saying that they didn't pursue the route of talking to other federations, and then Callis saying that they did. Conor Benn saying that he had a conversation with Chris Eubank Jr., and then Eubank Jr. on the same stage, but minutes later, saying that they didn't.
I remember that, because I saw that bit, and that is another bit I want to touch on there, because we had, you know, the media workout, which was almost as solemn as a funeral. I mean, I was sat watching it at home, but you did have, you know, kind of said, yeah, I've spoken to Chris about this. You know, we both want to fight. And then the interviews, the guy said, what, you spoken to him today? And it was almost like a knee-jerk reaction where he said, yeah, I've spoken to him today. But then as Chris comes on, he's like, I haven't spoken to him today. And I think you know, and like I said, I'm just looking at it from being in that situation. Conor's head is frazzled. He is literally all over the place. And he's literally just knee-jerk reaction. Yeah, I spoke to him today. When really, they've probably already had the conversation of when the findings initially came out. So no, he probably hasn't spoke to him that morning, but I do honestly believe that they would have all had the conversation about it. I don't know, what your thoughts?
Well, these are the things that it's just impossible to know, and when you see how kind of confused a lot of the rhetoric has been, then it's difficult to decipher exactly what has happened. But if you stick to the things that we do know have happened, we know that there was an adverse finding with that test. That's an absolute fact, and that was always the most important thing in this whole episode. And at that point, they should have pulled the fight. It's as simple as that. That is what they should have done, and they didn't do it. And if they had done it, then we would still be talking about this to an extent, because you would want this to be followed up. But at the same time, I think they could have minimized the damage of it by doing the right thing, basically. And then other things would have to happen. You know, if you haven't done this knowingly, if the athlete hasn't done this knowingly, then what you would want to happen next is for that B sample to be tested as quick as possible. Because in this situation, contamination is a possibility. Now, people might scoff and say, well, that's, you know, it's extremely unlikely, to stop making excuses for him and that kind of thing. These are the processes that have to be gone through. It is a possibility. That's why you have an A sample and a B sample, essentially in case the A sample gets lost or contaminated or tampered with somehow. But it's the same urine, it's the same stuff. So if something is in one, then it's going to be in the other one almost always. So test that B sample, get that tested. If it comes back the same, then okay, you can rule out contamination. That's off the list. And as I say, if you haven't done it knowingly, then you can say, okay, it's not that. Now I have to try and work out how this has happened. If you have done it knowingly, then testing that B sample is maybe something you would want to try and avoid, in the hope that somehow this will just blow over, which it won't. Or your other.
I was about to say, do you think it will?
No, it won't. No, it absolutely won't. But if you have done it, then you either blindly hope that somehow people are just going to forget about that, or you come clean, is what you do. Which not and had to.
It is quite a difficult situation. I mean, I've had a couple of, let's have a look at the comments. There's a couple of comments. Apologies because I'm engrossed in this conversation. I haven't had time to read the comments. So thank you for all of them that have joined. Yeah, simple, recognised VADA and none of this would happen. That's from Urban Legend, 1973. Sani, that sports guy. And for someone like Eddie to push it through after saying himself that VADA is effectively the gold standard and then proceeding to carry on is an unreal double standard. We've got a couple of people agreeing with him. Also, Sani said UFC signed someone called Jeff Nowitzki, the guy that exposed Lance Armstrong. And since he was there, the UFC, I would say, have become a lot more credible. Jade and Angela said it's all a mess. Yeah, Connor said he had spoken to him about it, but not on the day. I beg to differ, but I'll go over and I'll look at the live chat that I've got on, I think it was on Twitter. What do you think about everyone coming out and sort of like turning into like drugs experts? How have you found that? Because I don't know, it's like everyone's putting their 50 pence worth saying, and yes, and this doctor, because all I was seeing was tweets from this Dr. Sajjad, who I've seen do interviews with boxers, IG lives throughout the time that I've been on, involved, you know, with obviously this side of the boxing. So what are your thoughts on that? Have you seen anything in relation to what he said?
I mean, that's a pretty extraordinary situation in itself. You've got this guy out there who just seemingly is happy to do podcasts in the middle of which he elaborates on exactly what you need to do to beat the drug testers. That's something I discovered yesterday. It's
Yeah.
absolutely extraordinary. With regard to the substance itself, I generally tend to try and stay away from any kind of amateur diagnostics on that front. It's on the list. We know it's on the list. And then when I've read some comments from people who I trust that they know what they're talking about, it seems pretty clear that this is not the kind of thing that can somehow be generated naturally to a phenomenally or hitherto unexplained level. It's not something like that. It wouldn't appear to be something that could enter your system via contaminated meat, which is something we've obviously heard before.
Yeah, Beefgate. Yeah, I remember that
Coming
well.
up with an explanation for how this got into your system unknowingly would appear to be difficult. I would say it would appear to be difficult. I've heard a lot of people go very strong on this, and I understand why, because we had a contest fighter coming down in weight, saying himself that he may only be 60%, therefore suffering from weight drain, something which we know can be dangerous in boxing, and all things have gone tragically wrong. And amongst fighters particularly, you know, that sparked an understandably emotional response. And as I say, it would appear to be very difficult to explain how this would get into your system, how this would be ingested unknowingly.
So what are your thoughts on the other thing that, and yeah, like I said, we can't really, well, I definitely can't comment on anything to do with substances because I don't understand that. That is not my forte. I'm one of these that just really wanted the fight to happen and was probably quite selfish in my point of view, because I'd watched their fathers fight and it was going to be a brilliant fight, and it's just something that doesn't happen, and it was the fantasy fight that just never happened. So my opinions, you know, yes, of course, if you're testing positive for stuff or adverse findings, then of course the fight should go ahead. But I was a little bit more, oh my gosh, I really wish this hadn't have happened so the fight could have gone ahead. But what I think is slightly sinister, and like you said at the beginning, you think the person who leaked it should be credited. Why 3 days before the fight? If you're going to leak it, and leak it for the right reasons, leak it when you find out, or leak it when the test results are out, unless the person who leaked it just found out. But what to me is sinister is that, like I said, I always look at timelines, and the timeline is saying 3 days before this, they've had a media week that's literally started a week before. We're coming to the cusp of the end of it. The day before, you know, we're getting the public workouts, we're getting ready for weigh-in, etc., etc. And then it's just out there like a bombshell. I don't know. Maybe I'm a bit of a conspiracy theorist. Maybe I've watched too many alien conspiracy programs. But it's just, the timing to me is just very, very odd and almost spiteful. And I'm throwing it out there.
Yeah, you could make the case maybe that they were waiting for the people involved to do the right thing. And it was when they realised that they actually weren't going to do that, they weren't going to pull the fight, that they felt that they were backed into a corner and they had no choice but to do it.
Okay.
That it could be, you know, that would be an explanation. People seem to be unclear as to what VADA are actually required to do. And I looked on the UCAD website earlier on, and what they talk about is how VADA essentially are an independent entity, and they are employed or hired basically to provide this service for you. And their duty when they submit their findings as described and what I read earlier to the sanctioning body. There wasn't one in this case because there was no world title or anything like that on the line. But they also mentioned the licensing commission. which in this case would surely be the British Boxing Board of
Yeah,
Control.
yeah,
So Eddie Hearn did say that the Board of Control knew. They haven't, as far as I'm aware, made any comment on this at all, other than the brief statement they put out in reply to the statement from the promoters. In which case, enough people knew about this, and enough people with a vested interest in ensuring that this information was disseminated in the event of
yeah,
it appearing that the fight wasn't going to be pulled. You know,
yeah.
it's
Right.
as we said previously. You look at who would have the motivation to
Yeah, I
leak
get it.
this,
Yeah,
and
that makes sense.
yeah,
If
yeah.
you don't pull this fight, blah blah blah, and then we're not pulling the fight, then blah blah blah. So yeah, that
Yeah, I mean,
yeah, there's
we're speculating now, but it's
yeah we
okay to
are.
speculate about something like that, because
Yeah,
it's you know, there's just so many grey areas involved in this, and that's really what needs to change. It's just been handled. It's been handled just really badly. There's no other way to describe it, because what you say now in this digital age is there forever. And
yeah,
people have been digging out clips, and it's not been difficult to dig out clips of Eddie talking about VADA being the gold standard, and all of a sudden he wants to bypass them and ignore their findings. And I just don't
so
know
in
how
the
you
face
explain it.
so in the face of boxing, and we talk about well, we can't call it collateral damage, because the collateral damage would have been what happened if the fight had gone ahead. But we can talk about reputational damage. And reputational damage, I watch quite a few boxing channels all over the place. And what I've noticed is that some American channels are like, you know, some of the boxers out there saying that's why we don't want to go over to the UK, because it's different over there. Either it's the judges or people are failing tests and blah, blah, blah. So we talk about reputational damage, not just with a promoter, but we talk about it on a UK level, as in our reputation as you know, a country that's got promotion and we promote fighters. Your thoughts on that, and being in it for such a long time and commentating and for lots of fighters from all over the world. Your thoughts on the actual damage for that reputationally? Either way, whether the fight went ahead and the lateness that it got postponed, cancelled.
Yeah, I think there are kind of two sides to it. The reputational side of it. Now, this is one of these areas where we really can speak about it ourselves without fear of
Okay.
any kind of legalities, because this is the court of public opinion we're talking about now.
Yeah, yeah,
Because that's what reputation is. You know, perception is reality, isn't it? When it comes to reputation, particularly, you can argue it is with everything, but it definitely is with reputation. Because if you are perceived, if you are seen to have behaved in an improper manner, and that's what people decide, that's what the consensus is. You can
yeah.
talk about strict legalities all you like, it won't really matter. I think the reputational damage for Matchroom is severe. To be honest with you, I think the reputational damage for Eddie is severe, because of all these quotes that exist about him talking about VADA testing and talking about previous cases and talking about needing to take a commitment to a clean sport with the utmost seriousness.
Mm.
And then this, where he wants to essentially ignore a VADA finding because it doesn't suit him. There's just no way around that. There's just no way around that at all. I don't know how you go about trying to spin that or explain that. I really don't. And when you look at the UK from abroad, people will take a dim view of that. But the fight didn't happen. Now, I know that's an incredibly low bar to set, the fight not happening being worthy of any kind of praise. But at the same time, the Board of Control, with their statement, did take a strong stance against this. And ultimately, everybody that I've spoken to would agree that the Border Control did the right thing. They may well have done it knowing that a serious legal issue could, as a result, be pending. And they're not a rich organisation. They're really not. You know, they've got 8 or 9 members of staff who are full time. They're nothing like the FA or the Rugby Football Union or the Lawn Tennis Association or any of those bodies attached to other sports. But they stood their ground and they did what they did. And I think that you could look at that and have some admiration for that, I think, if you're looking at this from abroad. But it's not a good look, obviously, to say the least, but it doesn't mean that there can't be some good that comes from this, because there can always be improvements. There can always be things that could come out of it that can benefit us in the future. And that's really the only way to, when things are handled badly, you have to look at how you could try and make sure in the future that these things are handled better. And I spoke earlier on about the fork in the road that they found themselves at when they discovered this VADA finding.
Okay, yeah.
There can be no fork from now on.
Okay.
There cannot be a fork. You cannot stand there thinking, this is the right path. This is the one we should take. But it's also going to cost us a hell of a lot of money if we walk that path. There is this other one, which it is ethically and morally extremely questionable, but we could still go down it. That fork has to be has to be shut off.
It's got to be black and white.
Yeah, you have to just make sure in the future that you can't go down that road.
But in life, and I'll say this, sometimes you do things that you say, for example, that you're comfortable with doing. You won't necessarily take those risks unless you know that you may have got away with certain things before. Like you said, you know, you've got to look at the risk versus the reward here. And say, for example, what do they do? This is something that's not recognised. Like I said, this is why I do believe UCAD and VADA, something needs to be invested. You've mentioned that the substance is banned on both companies' lists. So then we have to look at those failings and moving forward, that the testing, albeit more expensive, maybe the people have to invest more money into the testing. So there isn't this grey area, because albeit, like you said, one's recognised by the British Boxing Board of Control and one isn't, the substances are on both lists. So then there has to be some kind of, you know, rebuttal against that. Well, why aren't the tests more stringent? Because if UCAD had found the same thing that's on their banned list because they've tested for it and it's there would have been no fork in the road. I know I'm playing devil's advocate, but you see where I'm going. I'm not saying that it's right to push it because it was adverse, etc. But that does create a grey area.
Yeah, I mean, with the testing, I can only assume that it didn't turn up on the UCAD testings just because of the timing of the tests. That had it been in the sample, this trunk element, then it would have shown up. They tested a different time, so it showed up in one, and it didn't show up in the other.
Okay.
I mean, we'd need to speak to an elite level fighter to know exactly how often you do get tested by UCAD and also VADA when you sign up for that, because it's generally speaking only the elite level fighters who make that commitment, because it costs money. But in this instance, you know, the testing did work, because they have picked this up, and as much as it's depressing when somebody tests positive for something, it's also good, because what you can't have is a situation where nothing is ever found, because in that situation
you question the testing.
You can't fool yourself that that's because nobody's doing it. all you can glean from that is that the testing is completely inadequate. So it's a bit of a double-edged sword, and to an extent, and we just need that. This B sample needs to get tested. This B sample needs to get tested.
So how long do they usually take? I mean, if you do know, how long does that? Because it's the same sample split into two. So how long does it take, or is it for an inquiry to come out like this, for them to say, all right, we've got to make sure there's no contamination here, let's get it tested? What's the procedure usually with that?
I've absolutely no idea on that,
Fair
and
enough.
that's one of the problems, because I don't know what the protocol is there. I don't know. As I said, VADA submit their findings to the organisers. Certainly,
Yeah.
the sanctioning body, as we say, there wasn't one in this instance because there was no belt. So certainly the promoters were notified. The licensing commission, which that's the British Boxing Board of Control in this instance. They haven't said. It would be useful if they would say at some point whether they were told when this was originally submitted, whether they were part of that conversation or not really. I mean, it's the B sample thing is surely the border control. As I say, when you think about that word prohibit, you're talking about
Yes.
law, rule, or
Yeah.
authority.
Yep.
Surely the border control have the authority here vested in them by themselves, if you like, but also by all of their license holders to say, until you get that B sample tested, you cannot box.
Yeah. I think everything that we've discussed, it looks like the line really needs to be drawn tighter, around the policies and the procedures, and make it more transparent, for people to understand, because there's a lot of wagginess, and like you said, it is the court of public opinion where people have damned Conor Benn to hell. You've seen how vile
Yeah,
and evil the internet is.
yeah, that's wrong as well, because you
Yeah, it
can't.
is.
People do get very emotional, and things are very binary now. Either you support something or you don't. Either something's for you or it's not. In this
Yeah,
situation, the fact of the matter is that they really do need to test this B sample, because it is possible that the A sample was contaminated,
yeah,
and it's just incorrect to rule
yeah,
that out as a possibility. It
yeah.
is remote. We know that kind of historically, but it is a possibility. And you have to, due process is there for, I was going to say it's there for a reason, but one of the problems here is that the due process is very, very unclear, but they've got to test that B sample. And then if it comes back the same, you can rule out one thing. You can rule out contamination after the event, and then you can move on at that point. But that's the first thing that just, that just has to happen.
The emotional effects on the fighter, obviously, kind of, I was there at the, what was supposed to be the press conference. I was there, bright and early. I think Eddie described us as vultures in the lobby. That's where we all have to wait. And it was postponed periodically. And I think that's when you did your take on Matt Macklin's take. You were doing it as that information was coming in. No, actually, you did it at the public workout. So we were waiting and waiting, kind of left earlier on in the day. And then we started to see fighters checking out of the hotel. So, it wasn't looking good anyway. And it's like statements that have been made are very, very, because obviously there's some legal involvement, because the statements were very short, limited and brief, and there were no post presser interviews by, say, any channels at all. It was literally, this is the statement. We're not prepared to take any questions. That this is what it is. Leave it as that. The legalities, when you're looking at something, that's as grave as this, or as big as this, because people all around the world were looking at this fight. Implications of maybe saying the wrong thing or being too honest in a world that like anything you do say can be used against you. Your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, it's difficult, isn't it? Because, you know, everybody gets a bit nervous around these things because
Yeah,
these are major issues, and you've got some big organisations involved with significant financial resources and all the rest of it. So there is definitely a kind of fear factor there, and not everybody is all that well versed in talking about these things. The boxing media is a you know, it's kind of unique because
it is.
one of the things about boxing it's an open house. It is an
Yeah.
open house, and a lot of people who come into the sport and cover the sport, they probably never really expect to get drawn into this kind of thing, and it makes people nervous. And I completely understand that. But what you can always do is just stick to and follow what people have actually said.
Okay.
The difficulty we always have in boxing is that essentially there really is nobody in charge. So it's
Yeah.
not like you can go to a particular UEFA, FIFA, FA, whatever, and say,
Yeah.
okay, what's happened? You know, we can't do that because we get our information in an instance like this. We get our information from people who have a horse in the race, let's say, who have an enormous vested interest in how this plays out. And that in itself is a highly, highly imperfect scenario. But that's where we are with boxing, and we decry that all of the time, that there is no overarching governing body worldwide. There's a border control here, then there's however many states there are in America, 51 is it,
Yeah.
individual sporting commissions, and then you've got commissions and boards of control, or whatever they describe them as, in every other country that has professional boxing in the world. And they all, to an extent, decide what they do. So all you can do in this scenario is keep track of what is it that you actually know. And I just come back to the same thing every time. All what we absolutely know in this scenario, and even this comes from having to take what VADA say as being gospel.
Gospel. Yeah.
What we know is that there was an adverse finding in a sample submitted by Conor Benn towards the end of August, as we understand it. And that's where all of this started. And that really is the only thing that no one is disputing. Everything else that we talked about,
Yeah.
you know, who knew, when they knew, all the rest of it,
Speculation.
we don't really know.
Yeah.
We don't really know. That is the one thing that we know. And like I said at the very beginning, what that should have meant is that they pulled the fight straight away, and they told people what had happened, and they were upfront and they were transparent about it. But transparency has been lacking around this whole fight, hasn't it, when you think about it? Because we still don't know what the contract was in terms of the punishment or penalty for EUBANK coming in overweight, for either one of them coming in overweight. But we always assumed that if anybody was going to, it would be Chris. And we still don't know what the rehydration clause was either. So heading into this fight, which was always going to be controversial because you've got somebody claiming he would be at 60%, which is something that the border control would have
Alarm bells.
had a massive alarm bells would have gone off when they heard that. We just don't know. We don't know what the rehydration was. Again, that was never shared. So you can never really claim that this whole situation was transparent really from the start.
It just, right, like in light of everything, it just makes you look back at everything, at boxing as a whole. And like you said, it shows where things are disjointed and there may need to be some connections, some improvements. for the safety of the sport, for well-being, and like I said, for some transparency for the journalists, the reporters, and the fans, because I'm a boxing fan and I like to learn literally about everything. And this whole situation has been very confusing. Even now, you've had ex-fighters that Connor's fought previously, and for those, I'm quite, I don't know, quite sharp and blunt with my words, but this is ending up to be like an inquiry where people are going to start coming out the woodwork, for a better word. We had, I think, Chris Van Heerden has said, "Oh, I wonder where that power came from," and Algeria, etc. So it's almost like it's provoking that to say, "Oh, that's why you beat me then," which then it just keeps on provoking. Oh yeah, well it must have been because of that and this, and but this is what I'm saying. The knock-on effect, it's not just about Saturday, it's about moving forward, and that kind of knock-on effect that something like this has, like you said, even though that B sample hasn't been yet tested and it's 100% written in stone.
Yeah, I mean, with regard to the situation surrounding Conor Benn, it is actually quite simple if you reduce it to its bare bones.
Okay.
Either he hasn't done it, and
Mm-hmm.
there's some contamination in that A sample,
Mm-hmm.
and the B sample will come back clear. That's possible. Like I said, we can't rule that
Yeah.
out until they actually test it. It's
Yeah.
unlikely, let's say that, but it's possible. So either he hasn't done it, and the B sample will indicate that,
Yeah.
or he has, but it's unknowing. This has
Yeah.
got into the system somehow unknowingly. Given what we read about the nature of the substance, it would appear that that is less likely in this case than it has been in some previous ones.
Okay.
Or he's cheated and has done it and knows he's done it. You know, those are the three options. It's got to be one of those three. And this is really the simplest part of the whole thing, in a sense. And only he knows. Only he knows. But
Moving forward then.
this is what testing is for, you see, because if
Yeah.
somebody isn't,
Yeah.
if somebody has done it knowingly and they're not going to admit it, they're not going to get to a place where they think, you know what, the game is up. And not many people do that. Then you have to trust the testing. But to be able to trust the testing, you have to allow the testing or insist that the testing is completed.
Yeah.
And then the border control have to assume that authority as the governing body to say, we are going to treat this the same as a UCAD finding, and we are going to suspend his license and take away his ability to box as a professional under our auspices in the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. And in that instance, that would really be, I think that would really be all they could do. Now, that wouldn't mean that he wouldn't be able to box somewhere else necessarily, but that would be all they could do in that scenario, as I see it.
And that's kind of like touching on, you know, moving forward. But like you said, we can't really, you know, we can only have opinions on scenarios. Like I said, if it's, you know, is contaminated, small percentage chance, very small percentage. But if it is contaminated, it will come up, it will null and void it, or it will draw a line under that, and Connor can then move forward. However, if it doesn't and it comes back as the same, there's reports that UCAD are now, you know, looking to investigate as well, which would make me think they're probably going to be looking at testing as well, and it comes back with the same adverse findings. Worst case scenario, like you said there, is, you know, Connor could come under a ban, which, you know, I've met him as I've met a few boxers, and this is me just, I don't know, being the caring person that I am. He would be absolutely devastated. But like you said, at the end of the day, if he's chosen to do that, then this is the reward for doing such. But as a fighter, to be able to, you know, to say, look, you know, drawn in front of the British Boxing Board of Control, the court, as it were, to say, we are now going to take your license. The effects of that on a fighter, the psychological effects, whether he did anything or not.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's a very, very serious thing. It's as serious as it gets. But you know, the identity of the fighter here is completely irrelevant. You're talking about athlete X. That's all this is. It doesn't matter that he's content. It doesn't matter the size of fighter he is. This is how this has to be done.
Mm-hmm.
Does that mean that that's how this has always been done worldwide throughout the course of sporting history? Have people received lesser bans because they are bigger names and generate enormous amounts of money? Some people would make a strong argument that yes, they have been, but that is no way to go about things. If you want to be taken seriously as addressing these kinds of issues in the right way, and it's more important in our sport than it is in any other. You know, I'm old enough to remember the Seoul Olympics in 1988 when Ben Johnson tested positive. And I remember watching it on the TV when Des Lynam, he said, I've just been handed a piece of paper here with a note on it, which if it's true, you know, will be one of the biggest stories in this Olympics or maybe in any Olympics. I remember it really, really well because I really wanted Ben Johnson to beat Carl Lewis. I don't know why, but probably because Carl Lewis used to win everything. I just wanted Ben Johnson to win. And he'd been cheating. He'd been cheating. And Ben Johnson was treated like an absolute outcast, pretty much, for the rest of his life. And it was very serious what he did. I'm not saying it wasn't, but he was taking drugs to help him run faster than other people, not to help him more effectively beat an opponent around the head with his fists. It's different. It's different. And that's why you have to be, you've got to be dispassionate about this. It doesn't matter who it is. We look at people in recent times. Dillian Whyte got a 2-year ban. He had to serve every day of that 2 years. Kid Galahad got 2 years, knocked down to 18 months in the end. But 18 months, you know, is a long time. I'm not one for blanket life bans because I think it is possible. Some very, very strange things can happen at times. Yeah. And somebody. You are absolutely responsible for what goes into your body, but some people are much more guilty of being an idiot than they are of a focused, intentional cheat, if you like. But I understand people's dissatisfaction with any kind of grey area. And if any fighter says to me, no, that's it, it's got to be a blanket life ban, I completely accept where they're coming from because they're the ones who've got in there and done it, and they know how better than anybody the risk that they take when they get in there. But we'll just have to wait. Again, you know, people might not like to hear me keep on saying it, but they've got to get that B sample tested. They've got to insist that B sample is tested, and they get that result from the B sample, and then they will have to proceed from there. And if he hasn't done it knowingly, he has got to provide an explanation as to how it has happened and present that. If an athlete has done this knowingly, I would say in this kind of scenario, the best thing to do is just come clean. But as I say, generally speaking, that is not what people do.
And I've learned a valuable lesson from what you said here. Do not, because you like fighters, you know, I like both Chris Eubank and Conor Benn, by the way. I haven't got a favourite. I was just happy that they were both fighting. But you've just got to be emotionless in it. And at the end of the day, just keep it black and white. If you've done something, you've done something. It's as simple as that. You can't have you know, feel sorry for people because then that's where, you know, the laws get bent and it's like, oh, but it's him. You know what he's like. He's a cool guy. Everyone likes him. Oh, let's let him get away with it. Can't work like that. So it's kind of like a little bit of a valuable lesson that you've taught me there. You've got to be really black and white with this.
Yeah, you do. And it's, you know, it's that's not the easiest thing to do at times. It's easy enough for me because, you know, my discipline is commentating on fights. I'm friendly with everyone. I get on with everybody. but I keep a bit of distance because
Okay.
I often have to. Yeah, I don't think it's. I'm never looking to kind of make a name for myself by virulently criticising fighters' performances, because nobody goes in there to give a poor performance. You know, you've got to be just balanced about these things. But doing what you do
Yeah.
is different, because you want that kind of access where it is on a more personal level, and the good stuff comes when they trust you and are prepared to tell you
Yeah.
things.
Yeah.
And athletes and just people in general can be very sensitive. So I would imagine you probably don't, for example, give too many opinions on who's going to win an upcoming fight, because you know that if you say, I think Chris Eubank Jr. is going to beat Conor Benn, if Conor Benn hears that, he will think that that is what you want to happen. Now, the two things are not the
Mm.
same at all, but that's how this is. So yeah, you do. You have to keep that distance as much as you can, and whoever it
Mm.
is, doesn't matter who it is. It doesn't matter if it's the most unpopular fighter in the world or the most popular fighter in the world. We have that everybody has to be the same in the face of this
Yeah.
procedure. And as disappointing as it is when you feel like somebody has let you down, but let themselves down, let the sport down.
Let the sport
It,
down.
like I say, it's good when people get caught. You know, it puts us all on a bit of a downer, but it's good when people get caught. But we don't know just yet. And I've seen a couple of comments here saying, come on, Andy, you know that the B sample will be the same. I absolutely hear what you're saying, but it must be tested first, because actually at the minute, you know, we don't know.
Mm.
And you can only go off facts. And
Yeah.
really, the only fact we've got, as you know, I'm repeating myself now, but really, the only fact we've got here, the one that everyone is accepting, is that this substance showed up in that VADA test. Everyone accepts that, and that's really that's
The
all this has
crux of
ever
it.
been about. That's
Yeah.
all this has ever been about. It's just that people did not act on that information in the way that they should have.
Yeah. Well, we have got, it says I've got 2 minutes left. That means we've been going for an hour.
Wow, it's one of those subjects, isn't it? You know,
It is. It is. And Andy, you're someone that I do look up to and admire. We've sat down and had conversations off camera. So it is an absolute pleasure to have you as a guest, because you are literally, if nobody knows Andy, he's extremely professional. When I see him, he's got his coat on, he's got his bag, he goes and sits down, he does his commentary, and he's like high and by. He's not one of these that, you know, is in a group of people. And I attract towards people that are like that, because it shows that they're individual and they don't need to be part of a group to feel like there's somebody. Because I call myself a bit of a Billy No Mates, but I like being like that. So you're somebody that I can say, yeah, I can relate to him. But yeah, this has been a really interesting conversation. Are you at the Savannah Marshall Clarissa Shields Savannah Marshall fight next week?
Yeah, I think I will be. I think I will be. I'll be around quite a lot of the week, because me and
Good.
Macklin are trying to get some podcasts under our belt. So and it's really near. I live in East London, so all that stuff's near me. So I
Oh,
think I'll be
awesome.
around quite a lot, actually. Yeah. So I'll see you then.
Oh, definitely. But thank you so much for your time. Guys, thank you very much for listening in. Sorry I didn't get to go through all the questions. I really wanted to just pick Andy's brain myself. Until the next time, Andy, I'll see you. Well, I'll see you in a few days.
Yeah, we'll do. Take it easy.
Take it easy.
Cheers.
Bye, 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 bye.